Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon. This is Marcy, founder of Brown Girl Collective and the leader or the founder also of the BGC Book Club. I'm here with you this afternoon. I know it's a little earlier than our normal time, but we're here because we have an extra special international guest, and we wanted to make sure that we can accommodate her and her time and her schedule, so we're on a little bit earlier. So I hope that some of you are able to join us live. I see there's at least one person here live now, and keep on coming in. And if you can't be here with us live, this conversation will be available to you to watch at your leisure. So once again, I'm Marcy Thomas. I am the founder of Brown Girl Collective and the BGC Book Club, which has been in existence since Brown Girl Collective has been around for actually 11 years now, and the BGC Book Club has been around since April. So I'm definitely glad to be here, definitely glad to share one of the things that I love with all of my sisterin out there, which is books. And we've had a great time, had some great authors on, and looking forward to doing more and more of this as we move forward. So I'm going to go ahead and get started because I don't want to delay anyone this afternoon. If you're getting off of work or, getting ready for dinner, whatever the case may be, I don't want to hold you long. So today's book, or our book for this month, is actually Minna Salami's Sensuous Knowledge. Let me tell you a little bit about Minna as we bring her on. She is a Nigerian, Finnish, and Swedish writer, feminist theorist, and lecturer. She is the founder of the multiple award-winning blog, Miss Afropolitan, which connects feminism with contemporary culture from an Africa-centered perspective. And she is also the author of the book that we'll be discussing today, Sensuous Knowledge. The book has also been optioned by a Hollywood-based production company. Minna is listed alongside Angela Jolie and Michelle Obama as one of 12 women changing the world by Elle magazine. She is a contributor to The Guardian, BBC, CNN, The Independent, Al Jazeera, and The New Internationalist, and many other publications. She is also a columnist for The Guardian Nigeria. She has lived in Nigeria, Sweden, Spain, and New York, and now currently lives in London, where she's 5 hours ahead of us if you're on the East Coast. And she's passionately committed to promoting feminist empowerment. So without any further delay, welcome, Minna.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. And thank you, Marcy. I'm really pleased to be here.
Yes, I'm glad to have you. And anyone who's currently on, just drop where you're from in the comments so we can kind of know who's here and just get an idea of where you're from. Jan has popped on, so welcome, Jan. But yes, Minna, it's definitely a pleasure to have you here, and thank you so much for accommodating us on your schedule. As we mentioned, you're 5 hours ahead of me, so I'm glad.
Thank you for rescheduling. I know you normally go a bit later, but yeah, it would have been in the middle of the night over here, so I appreciate it. Yeah.
Anyway, just go ahead, and I know you wanted to share some things from the book, so please feel free to go ahead and just share some things or tell us a little bit about Sensuous Knowledge for those who had a chance to read, and maybe those who did not have a chance to read and would be interested in the book.
Okay, sure. So thank you, first of all, for having me once again, and thanks for the introduction. It did cover, pretty much what I do, and so. I am based in London. I spend a lot of time in Lagos, and I've lived in many countries. I have a multi-varied background. And I mention this because these are some of the reasons I would say that I decided to write Sensuous Knowledge, or it wasn't like a conscious decision that, because of my multiple backgrounds, I'm going to write a book. But I think because of experiencing the world from different angles and always encountering similar, what I found to be similar issues, to do with race, to do with gender, to do with class, to do with how we treat the natural world. I just felt like I had no choice but to write this book. And it's a similar sentiment that I had with setting up my blog, Ms. Afropolitan. It was just something that I felt I needed to do because there were so many things that weren't being discussed, or at least weren't being discussed in the way that I saw it, you could say. And I'm sure you share similar feelings. I just found out that you've had the Brown Girl Club for 11 years. So, you know, it's that sense of needing to contribute to the discourse. And, you know, technology made it possible with our blogs. And with the book, I was compelled by a similar kind of sentiment. What then happened as I was writing was that I kind of intuitively came to, this is while I was writing the proposal, I intuitively came to what I called sensuous knowledge. And sensuous knowledge, I'm going to read a little bit, but I just want to give you this context before I do, it's a holistic way of approaching knowledge production, because what I'm arguing is that if the knowledge that we use to try to transform our societies and to try to transform ourselves is based in a patriarchal and Eurocentric prism, which is what I call Euro-patriarchal knowledge, and that I contrast to sensuous knowledge. If we use that knowledge, even when we are trying to affect change and radical transformation, we are kind of going to be hitting against the wall. And I find that is something that is occurring so much in the movements that I'm involved with, in feminism, in Black liberation, and Pan-Africanism, and so on and so forth. And so I wanted to write a book that was, I guess, because most feminist books are intending to politically radicalize the reader. And I wanted to write a book that would politically radicalize the reader, but would also radicalize them inwardly, so spiritually or emotionally or psychologically, whichever way you want to call it, so that the change and the transformation that we fight for in individual and collective planes is like a holistic, embodied, rounded process. Okay, so there's these two kind of threads in my book: sensuous knowledge and Euro-patriarchal knowledge, and then I sort of analyze universal concepts with these contrasts. So concepts like beauty and power, identity, womanhood, race, art, and one of the reasons, you know, when I say that it felt like an urgency for me to do that, it is because these topics are, it's kind of, you know, it's almost like a taboo or a no-go zone for women, for Black women in particular. We're expected to focus on like issues that are more specific to only us. But I was interested in sort of flipping it around and looking at issues that impact all of humanity, but from a Black feminist perspective. So I'm going to read from my chapter, which is about womanhood. And the segment that I'm reading is, it describes a little bit about why I came to my feminism, to my Black liberation, and ultimately to writing the book. A few months before my 13th birthday and the teenage years that I look forward to spending with my best friends in Nigeria, my mother and I moved to Sweden as a military coup had made life in Nigeria even more politically and economically challenging than it already was. Can I just ask you, can you hear me properly? Because I have an echo on my line.
I can hear you.
Good. Okay, I'll continue. We were lucky to have... Sorry?
I still hear you.
Okay. We were lucky to have the opportunity to escape, unlike most Nigerians. But although life in Sweden would eventually hold many positives, I was devastated. I missed Nigeria and my father, although he visited as frequently as he could. I could not speak Swedish, and I found it hard to make friends. I was bullied and physically attacked because of my skin color. And yet, the worst was to come. I got my period. It was not the physiological development of menstruation that depressed me. It was the symbolic meaning. Starting my period signified that I was becoming a woman, And that prospect seemed uninviting, as it was clear to me by then that women were unhappy with the predicament of being women. After all, they always complained about their husbands, their bodies, their lack of opportunities, basically their lot in life. However, I was enraptured by some women, those in magazines and movies. They were bold, free, and playful, as I wanted to be. But real women, the ones that I knew and that I observed, they were what the philosopher and activist Noam Chomsky, in the book on Western terrorism, called the unpeople, which is a term he borrowed from George Orwell. Chomsky argued that the motive of what he called intellectual and moral colonization is to get the unpeople to accept that oppression is natural. He gave the example of how women for millennia accepted being the property of their husbands and fathers because they had internalized the patriarchal education that told them that it was women's role to serve others and to have no rights themselves. Simply put, the unpeople are those who for diverse reasons are complicit in their own oppression. The ways that women are made the unpeople today have thankfully decreased. Since Saudi Arabia legalized women's suffrage in 2015, there's no country where women can't vote, and women everywhere are securing new freedoms and rights. Still, in many parts of the world, women remain the possessions of their husbands, fathers, and patriarchal culture at large. Even among modern, educated women in Nigeria, many wives still ask their husbands' permission for basic things such as doing the work they'd like to do, or going out with friends, or even spending time with their birth families. Everywhere around the globe, women still accept and protect patriarchy in myriad ways, by executing traditions that harm women's bodies, or by carrying out unpaid labor within the domestic space, or by taking men's family names, or through worshiping male gods, or by supporting imperialism, or through heedlessly raising entitled boys who continue to oppress future generations of women. These are only some of the ways that women are patriarchal, and it is no accident that they are. Men know that the best way to dominate women is to manipulate them into oppressing themselves so that they don't have to. Male supremacists have always used culture, religion, tradition, politics, education, psychological tactics, and violence to force women to think patriarchally. Practices such as breast ironing, female genital mutilation, and widow punishment are often carried out by women themselves. Women are socialized to uphold denigrating views about women's roles in the family, in politics, in sexual life, and in society at large. Even those many women who hate patriarchy often have no choice but to succumb to its demands because of their social and financial position. Detrimental as structural oppressions are, the ultimate weapon in turning women against women is the Europatriarchal nature of knowledge production itself. If our approach to knowledge production is patriarchal, then ultimately everything we know and everything we do as a result of what we know will be patriarchal too. If knowledge production is systemically anti-woman, then these values will shape everything from our intimate relationships to our social structures. It is in those deep recesses of ingrained psychological and social behavior that seeds for lasting change can also be planted. Moreover, because those interior places are indeed especially affected by poetics, creativity, and imagination, to rescue womanhood from the unpeople position it has held for too long, we deleteriously negate the imaginative. So playing, exploring patterns, using mixed methodologies such as stories, sound, or embodied analysis and synthesis that has always constituted women's ways of knowing in favor of administrative and bureaucratic indices and statistics. Within this psychosocial context, I contend that women are patriarchal because adulthood is by default constructed as manhood. And so becoming an adult when you are female means appropriating manhood. By adulthood, I don't in this instance mean attaining a legal age, buying a house, having a pension fund, or other signifiers of the responsibilities that come with being a grown-up. Instead, I'm reflecting on adulthood as it relates to the more complex behavioral sense of personhood, which involves feelings of independence, self-worth, strength, fearlessness, clarity of thought, responsibility, and most of all, self-reliance. Likewise, by manhood, I don't mean maleness per se, but rather the value system that is constructed around men and masculinity. Since the psychosocial conditioning of manhood contains an abundant element of sexism, that is, the reduction, repudiation, and resentment of that which represents the feminine, when a woman transitions toward adulthood and begins to appropriate conditioned male psychology, being that adulthood is equated with manhood, she simultaneously enters a landscape of self-loathing. This was why my becoming a woman terrified me. I was standing on the threshold of what I perceived to be a threat to my sense of self-worth. My fears were justified. If indeed adulthood is psychosocially defined by manhood, then womanhood, if it can be psychosocially defined by any one thing at all, is defined by a lack of maleness. Whether this manifests as the lack of a boy child, a husband, or attributes that will gain the approval of men, such as a specific look and body type, a humble demeanor, and so forth, a woman is always chasing something that she perceives to be essential to her very womanhood, but that in reality is necessary to her proximity to manhood. This is why, if and when women attain the deep sense of independence and self-reliance that form personhood, which for many women is later in life, say after a divorce, when they find themselves asking for the first time what they really want out of life, their new attitude is invariably associated with manhood. They are told that they act or think like a man. A woman who acts like a woman implies a woman who upholds accepted, submissive, self-deprecating norms. We have to wonder why, when boys are being raised to attain personhood from childhood, we haven't insisted on the same for our daughters. Until little girls can proudly grow into women who act like women when they are being self-assured and autonomous, as much as when they are being compassionate or emotional, then feminist work is incomplete. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for that reading, and it definitely gives a great context of the book and what everything is about. And it's interestingly that you chose that part to read, because one of the questions that I had was in regards to that, how as women or girls growing up, we are kind of brought up to think that, if you get married, if you have children, just different things that we do, that it's all about how are you going to relate to or be in relationship with a man. But I have often or always felt that we need to also have our own self-sufficiency. That it's not that we're just going to school to meet a husband. Or, I have been a part of spiritual communities where everything was about, one day when you get married and have children, one day when you get married and have children. What if that isn't my goal? What if what if it doesn't happen? Then what? Who am I supposed to be if that doesn't happen? So I really appreciate the fact that you're saying that for us to truly take our place in this world as women, that we need to tap into our power, whether it be emotional intelligence, as you mentioned, our intellect, that it's okay for us to be a combination of both.
Thank you. Absolutely. Like it's and it's not about, as your comment is alluding to, it isn't about being independent in the sense of not wanting to engage with a man or marry a man. Like, many women absolutely make those choices from an empowered state. But it is really this thing of self-reliance and personhood, which is it's an important factor in all our relationships, whether it's romantic or platonic or professional. When we, from a young age, are deprived, like everything about the conditioning of girls from the very beginning, is depriving that sense of, I got this, like that is such an important feeling to operate through life with. This feeling that, life can be tough. You go through ups and downs, setbacks, there's injustice in the world, there's heartbreak, there's all kinds of violence and bad things. But that sense that, boys are really programmed from early on to feel like they can conquer everything. Hence, all of the superhero associations, which, are also connected to violent action and other things that I think, one day there needs to be a men's movement that really wants to go to the bottom of these things. But it's sorrowful that, and I still see that today with young girls. We're still being deprived of that really essential quality of I got this. So I did want to focus throughout the book, but especially in this chapter, on womanhood, on what it would be to associate womanhood with this sense of personhood. What does that look like given the history of women, given and I go way back to ancient Egypt, and then, looking at West African mythologies and how they described womanhood, and what else I use all kinds of examples, and ultimately I give some perspectives on somebody like Winnie Mandela, and describe how she kind of is somebody that you can look at and think, oh, that is one way of being very firmly woman, very firmly feminine, but still simultaneously very independent and self-reliant and fully embodying personhood. So it's the hope that, I kind of wanted that chapter to embed a lot of symbols in the reader's visualizations. So that's why I used a lot of storytelling and mythology, as well as feminist theory and historical figures to make that case.
One of the other things that I liked in that chapter, you talked about women and African tradition, our connection to the color blue. That painting, that blue actually is one of my paintings. But I was thinking about that because, and how they learn to work indigo and things like that, because I live in Southeast Georgia, which is close to South Carolina, and one of the things that the women there, the Geechee culture that's based in that area, is that they taught women how to work with indigo. So I just thought that was really neat to hear you talk about it coming from Africa, and me knowing that that's something they even have people that teach classes about how to work with indigo and stuff like that. So there are so many of these things that are part of our history and our culture and our traditions that are still playing out in places now. And just kind of a sidebar on that, one of the reasons why I wanted to read your book, and one of the reasons I thought it was important to have you on, because as an African American, there is a lot of times ways in which people try to treat us like we're different, like we're not all coming basically to the same traditions and things like that in terms of culture. So what are your thoughts about that? Because I know you say you've lived in a lot of different places in America. So what has your experience been as far as that being, dealing with African Americans versus Africans who live in other parts of the world?
I'm so glad you raised that, because I think it's a huge problem, especially in our times. We've got the Black Lives Matter making so much progress, and also Pan-Africanist movements have grown a lot in the past. They were stronger in the 60s and 70s, but now they're kind of re-emerging. And yet, I think before we can even fully leverage the success of these movements, we kind of have to address this elephant in the room, which is that, it's like we think that we either have to have the same traditions and be the same and everybody agree, or we have to divide and separate and say, oh, you know, we're only going to associate as being African Americans or Nigerians, or even within Nigeria, you have different ethnic groups, and people say, no, now I'm not Nigerian, I'm Yoruba, I'm Igbo. And so what I do in my book is I use Blackness. I argue that Blackness it's the kind of glue, the thing that glues us together across the continent and the diaspora. And what that means is that Blackness is like it's like the conduit, it's the conductor that traverses us through our shared history, our philosophies. And by philosophies, I mean the way that Black people think and conceptualize feelings about, you know, things like love, death, food, family. And when you think about it that way, you realize that there are so many commonalities around the world, you know, how we think about death. Like everywhere in the world, Black communities will have a strong sense of there being, you know, the ancestors are still present. They're just in another realm, so to speak. And so what I'm arguing in the book is that if we want to like access these philosophies, these histories, then Blackness is the arguably, you know, the vessel, the best way for us to access that. There might be other ways, I don't know, but I find that we don't typically see Blackness in this sense. And when we do, what then happens also is that we become more soft toward this idea that we have to like think alike or have the same experiences. What it is that we share a history, we share a legacy, a lineage, you know, and this lineage contains the knowledge that our ancestors have been accumulating over time. It doesn't contain any kind of dogmatic principle that dictates that we must all think the same or operate within the same like political movements even. But it is important that we have that spirit toward Blackness. I feel like that is what will ultimately lead these powerful movements and moments that we currently have toward a direction of emancipation and not only protest. Because important as that is, you know, where we've been protesting for a long time, and the next step needs to be focusing more on how we're going to be emancipated. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That is something that comes up a lot, you know, just, you know, people trying to differentiate. And of course there are differences, but there are enough things that make us similar. There are enough things that we share that we should be able to come together collectively and work together to get certain things done. One of the other things that you spoke of in the book was talking about liberation. And you spoke specifically about Lauryn Hill. And a lot of people have over the years, you know, they love her first album and, you know, all of that great music that she came out with years ago. But then there was a point in time in her journey, in her career, where she kind of took a different turn. And because it wasn't that thing that was commercialized or, you know, whatever the case may be, that there has been different attitudes that people may have towards Lauryn Hill. Would you speak of her as a strong person that is trying to propel us or make us think about liberation? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I would love to. So I adore Lauryn Hill. She is a great, you know, and when I say adore, I'm not even speaking as like a fan of her music, which I am, but she's a teacher. She's been a teacher in my life. And what I argue, the way that I use her album, the MTV Unplugged album, has always been, but very specifically in my book, I use it as a kind of like a treatise on liberation. I find it to be, you know, it happens to be in the form of music, but if it were a book, it would, and I owned it, you know, it would be in tatters because I would have been reading it so often. Every time I listen to that album, it gives me, it feeds me with knowledge, and it feeds me with knowledge specifically about liberation, but also other things. But I say specifically about liberation because every song in that album is dealing with how to end deception and delusion. And I would define liberation as the ending of deception and delusion, because when that ends, you can just be free. And therefore, I think, you know, her delivery of the album is so central to the message as well, because it wasn't polished, it was raw, you know, and the world was definitely not ready for it. I think that the world is more ready for it today because we've been through decades now. The album came out in 2000 and 2001, and you know, so we've had a couple of decades in which we have seen humanity take superficiality to its pinnacle. And so, you know, I think now there's something very refreshing about this unpretentious delivery of the album. And I think also that there's been more conversation about, you know, spirituality can be such a loaded word, and there's this idea of spirituality as something that doesn't have regard for reason and logic and science. But I think that we're also more receptive now to how these things can be combined. And so this is just a piece of art and a piece of knowledge for me, a thesis, this album, Unplugged, in which all of these things are being combined. So in a sense, that chapter on liberation is a bit of a love letter to that album and to Ms. Hill, but it's also a treatise of my own, you could say, and a sense of, you know, how we can really exist in this society and be free, but be in resistance at the same time. And so while I'm using the album as a focal point, I'm also bringing in like different examples of, for example, clowns is a theme that I think Ms. Hill also plays around with, which I argue in the book. And then this idea of masks, which is something that clowns also wear. They wear a mask. And obviously in African historical society, like the mask plays a really huge role. You know, in Western Euro-patriarchal culture, the mask is seen as something negative most of the time, as something to hide. Whereas in many, at least in West African societies, the mask is used as a kind of pinnacle of how to be. So, you know, people wear the mask so that they can embody the qualities that the society has said, this is what this mask represents. And I feel personally for me that has been quite a useful metaphor to think about liberation with. Like, what is the mask that, what kind of qualities would we put into a mask if we were sculpting one collectively? And then once we define that, we can sort of wear the mask more easily.
Thank you for the explanation. I thought that was great. You also mentioned in that chapter, Minna Salami, there are some similarities between Ms. Hill and Minna Salami. Actually, I know that Lauryn Hill has re-recorded a lot of music, so I guess she has some spiritual connection to Minna Salami and her story and some of the things that Nina went through and experienced. And the fact that Nina was also a person about once she got on board, she was about liberation and using her voice and using her talent and her music to speak of liberation in ways that made me genuine, which you mentioned that as well.
Yeah. And also, can I just say that that chapter was written, like I'd incorporated verses from the album, like the actual lyrics in quotations, and it was meant to be read so that you pause and you get like a chunk of her verses. And just a few months before going into print, I was told that like it would cost me thousands to get the rights. And I'm like, why didn't anybody tell me sooner? And so I had to like rephrase things. But yeah.
Right, like nobody did that. So one of the other concepts that you read that I really like when we talk about colonizing the mind. It says, imagine the mind as a garden. Our traditional idea of decolonizing it would be like vigorously chopping down a poison ivy that is threatening to infest the garden with its toxic branches. But decolonizing the garden of the mind is more about planting new, rare, forgotten, and hybrid trees, herbs, and flowers that eventually do away with the ivy. It is decorating the trees with bowls where birds can rest and sing songs of freedom. It is creating a wild meadow in the center of the enclave and finding time to just lie in this green play. And one of the things that I really liked about that, and you can speak more to it, about a lot of times it's hard for us to move towards liberation or some of these other broad concepts that we have in our minds. Our minds are colonized. We're taught to think, with the patriarchal view, and that many times we need to decolonize our mind so that we can tap more into who we are as Black people, as women, as whoever it is that we want to be. So can we talk a little bit about that and how we go about decolonizing our minds?
Yes. Can I just say that was so beautiful to listen to? Can I borrow you whenever I'm doing one of these so you can read? I think that was the first time I heard somebody read apart from the audiobook. So that was lovely. Thanks. It's so the thing is that we have been involved in these struggles for so long, and as I said in the beginning of this conversation, I felt an urgency to write this book. And in part because I think that so there's a culture of, trying to identify the issues and then critique them. And my book certainly does that, but it also sort of offers a new way, not the way, but one way that is new and that can sort of transform things. And so with decolonization, the way that we approach it today, whether it's, individually in some cases, but certainly in our institutions, is in the typical methodical, hierarchical, linear way that Euro-patriarchal knowledge advocates. Now, I'm not saying that there's something inherently wrong in there's a time and a place for methodology and structure and all of that, but decolonization is probably not that place, because we have been approaching it that way for so long, and I think what is happening, at the moment there's a peak discussion of decolonization, and that is positive. I don't want to downplay the importance that just a few years ago very few people could speak to decolonization, and now everybody's talking about it. But there's this real sense of, it's this typical thing of wanting to rush to something. The same thing happened with intersectionality and with feminism and Black liberation, where, we're trying to rush toward saying that I'm a feminist, I'm decolonized, I'm this, I'm that. And then what happens is we have these institutions that co-opt what the movements are about at their core. And so this idea of, rather than think if the mind were a garden rather, and what we're doing now, in the segment you read, is chopping down what we don't like. When I'm suggesting that instead, if we had this garden and we had hybrids and saw just let everything grow and define it from there, that would be an approach that we can affect change with right now, because we're not gonna get rid of all of the problematic institutions in 1 week or 1 year or even one, decade or probably even century. But what we can do is juxtapose all of those things with the new knowledge that we keep gaining. And so, yeah, there's an element of, I'm writing this chapter with the interest in mind of that people don't get, first of all, confused about what decolonization is, and then disheartened that they're not sort of manifesting it. Because the way we speak about it now, it's almost as if the prefix D is something that you can, it's like you can amputate that section of your mind or of an institution that is colonized. But the mind doesn't work that way, that just creates paranoia and censorship, and it makes people feel competitive. Like, am I more decolonized than you are, or vice versa? And it fosters that kind of thinking. And so I think we need to just be more clear cut about the process, and more sort of rooted in reality, but also in a kind of poetry and beauty, so that we don't get bogged down in this spirit of constantly resisting and protesting without simultaneously infusing our lives with beauty and meaning and joy, because that is really what decolonization is. If we were to picture, let's use the African continent, because that's the one we associate with, like, the de facto colonization. If we were to picture a decolonized Africa, essentially, I would argue that what most of us would envision is, nations, or maybe there wouldn't even be nations, but certainly like, a continent in which people were able to appreciate the beauty of their land, the beauty of their history, their culture. And so if ultimately that's what decolonization looks like, then why are we not incorporating that into the way the actual process is happening? So that's kind of the crux of the argument in that chapter.
Well, thank you for the explanation. I just feel that we have so many ways of thinking and doing that aren't even things ideas that we came up with ourselves.
Yeah.
Things that other people have put on us, whether it has to do with our blackness, or whether it has to do with who we are as women, or who we are in the workplace, whatever it is. It's always someone else or someone else's structure telling us what's right and what's wrong. One of the things that came out to me a lot about that, about how sometimes we become our own oppressors. I have a friend who at one point in time was working at a Black-owned financial institution. And she was a natural hair girl and all of that, and Black-owned. And at a certain point, she decided to straighten her hair. Around the time she straightened her hair, all of a sudden, the Black people that she worked with were like, "Oh, now you look professional." Oh, now exactly. Now we can, now we can look at promoting you. Now we can call you. And it's like, wow, but this is a Black-owned institution. They're not realizing how their mind is colonized to think that we must fit into a certain standard of what makes you quote unquote professional in order to be worthy of, getting, even though she had all the education, did all the right things, but they still didn't feel like she was defending herself professionally because of her. So those are the types of things that we really, that really makes me think about that, just, practical, how it shows up in the world type of way.
Definitely. It's so crazy, but it still happens all the time. Hair is still such a big issue, Black hair. And yeah, like your example with your friend, like it speaks to how it's the prejudices don't only come from white people, but from us ourselves. We have these. It was the same like in school in Nigeria, and I'm mixed race, so like my hair is different to but I was told that I was allowed to wear my hair because everybody had to plait their hair, and I did in some schools and even in the same school for some years. But then there was a phase, I can't really remember the logic behind it, but I was allowed to just, as long as I wore my hair back. But like none of the Black, Nigerian, both parents Nigerian children were allowed to do that. So there's the colorism is also, so deeply embedded into all of this. And yeah, I just love what you said about how it's like everything, things have been defined for us by others. And that is so true across the board. Like even with going back to talking about Blackness, so there's a strong desire to associate more with Africanness than with Blackness at the moment in the continent. By no means like for everyone, but it's quite prevalent. But as I describe in my book, how Africa was it's an invented term in itself, and it was actually also advocated for by white communities who wanted to enforce Christianity. So initially, the Black people who called themselves African were usually people who had converted to Christianity, which was very uncommon. This is like 17th century, 18th century. And so they then went out into African communities, now African communities, at the time different ethnic communities, and spoke about this African identity, which was tied to Christianity. And so, like, even if you go back into this term, it was defined by somebody else, by another group, for their own intentions and purposes. Which is not to say that we should discard it. I'm proudly African, as we all should be, but it's quite important to be aware that the terminology we use is not straightforward by any means. And again, I think that helps us to connect more, because we then realize that regardless of where in the world we find ourselves, we've all been subject to the same kind of play with language, play in quotation marks. Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to talk about, as we're talking about being defined by others, is your concept of beauty. And I'm kind of going towards the end of the book, but you did talk a lot about beauty, how beauty is defined in different ways. You had three specific ways that you talked about beauty being defined, one being political, one being artificial, and the other being genuine. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes. So I make the case that there are these three types of beauty, and then so political beauty, artificial beauty, and genuine beauty. And political beauty is, the way that beauty is defined for Black women, for women at large, as well, having a political agenda behind it. And I go far back to the Bible. It probably goes even beyond that. But looking at how Eve became the kind of epitome of beauty, and then showing how that same or those same ideals have traversed through history until today. And so we still have, like, even though the depictions are becoming a bit more diverse, you still can find this archetypal Eve-like image of beauty in. And so I think it's useful for women when we're analyzing beauty and when we're getting images of what beauty should be like, to be able to have this concept in mind, because then we can sort of identify that, oh, there's some kind of political agenda behind this. So maybe this isn't something I need to read into too much. And then artificial beauty is, it's obviously it's connected to political beauty. It's kind of the next step, the thing that empowers the agenda of political beauty. And that is when beauty is, when it is superficial and it's tied to consumerism and capitalism. So it promotes this message that beauty is something that you can purchase, but not only that you can purchase, but that you can purchase like for a quick fix of pleasure. It's really ephemeral. You know, and then, but then the moment you purchase it, you know, it disappears. It's like, it's no longer, it doesn't give any kind of lasting satisfaction. And so that, again, I think is really useful for women to be able to see when, you know, if you're getting a message of, oh, you know, 10 ways to be beautiful in some magazine or something like that, you know, and then you can use these and you can see, oh, is that a political agenda? Is that artificial? And then lastly, the third type of beauty that I describe is genuine beauty, which is so difficult to describe. And, you know, it's the kind of thing that you can't really grasp. And I don't try to do that in any rigid way. But what I think is true to genuine beauty is that it has a quality of everlastingness. So, you know, like when you see a beautiful scenery, you know, natural setting or something, that setting has been there 100 years ago, 1,000 years, you know, it will be there 1,000 years from now. Well, hopefully, we don't know because of climate change, you know, but there's just something, so where artificial beauty is so ephemeral, there's something everlasting to genuine beauty. And so, yeah, it doesn't mean that, you know, we don't take pleasure in how we look, or we don't want to look better or take care of ourselves or whatever that might be. But even in that, there's something everlasting in how, you know, and I use many examples of how women have always been quite drawn to aesthetics. So like, you know, women in ancient Egypt and Afghanistan and all of these parts of the world, they used kohl pencils to, you know, paint their eyes and say, I mean, we like this, but then we're told that this is something superficial and, you know, and it's kind of even if you look at the main press, you know, the beauty pages are sort of seen as a bit silly, a little bit like, oh, that's women's thing. But of course, sports are very serious. And, you know, like there's this interesting contrast. And so one of the things, going back to like when we have that sense of personhood as women, then rather than feel ashamed almost of our interest in aesthetics, we can connect to what is pleasurable about them. Like this, it's a bit of a gift from the universe to be able to play with color, to be able to experiment. What isn't a gift, what is a burden, is that, you know, the patriarchal system has made it so that we should use it as something to compete and rank and judge ourselves with. That was never the point. Like women have always used cosmetics for, just for the sake of ritual, healing. A lot of the traditional elements have like healing properties. And it's that passage of time in this case that is everlasting. You know, that need, that human need and desire to imbue things with meaning. So I'm not saying that, you know, wearing eyeliner is something everlasting, but that sense of this is something that even if it's just for 2 seconds of a day, it brings me, you know, a little bit of a lift. That's something that we have always done.
One thing also, like we talked about in that, and it made me about the connection, even our connection with other women in terms of sisterhood. And it made me think about, actually my mom was talking about this the other day. I'm wearing this. I have natural hair that's growing out.
Nice.
I've been wearing a lot of hair wraps just because.
That's a great look. Yeah.
I really want to braid your hair. And I can remember being a little girl and her braiding my hair and keep going, and just all those sorts of things that is like, women have done that, still do that, people do that, whether it be in family or sisters or friends. That's just a bonding over, you know, making ourselves more beautiful, or we feel beautiful, like adorning our hair or, you know, things like that. So there is another,
absolutely,
you know, and like and I've heard people say, a lot of times when women, when we do these things, we do it for ourselves, and sometimes we're doing it for other women. We're not necessarily doing it because we're trying to get men to look at us, or, you know, men to the life is a lot of men don't like all this paint and stuff anyway.
Exactly. And why do women in like prisons, why would they get engaged with, because they do a lot of that, like they
Right.
put makeup on each other, they do each other's hair. There's no men in prison,
Right.
so it isn't about that.
So, there is beauty in that as well. Well, we are getting close to the end of our time, so I don't want to hold you or everyone too much longer. I know it's late where you are. But I did have one more thing that I do want to bring up just as we prepare to close out, and it has to do a bit with with power. Right now here in the United States, we are in the midst of an election cycle, and a Black woman was chosen to be a vice presidential candidate. And in that, there are a lot of things that are coming up with her about, something we talked about, her and her level of Blackness, her and, just, I know originally before she was officially selected, people were saying she's too ambitious, just all these things that are negative that are pointed towards her as a Black woman as it pertains to power or her desire to attain power. So just as we prepare to wind down, what thoughts or ideas do you have about Black women and being in power as Black women?
Well, a lot of thoughts on that, but I'll keep it succinct. I think that we have to redefine power. Power, and that's something that I do in my book. But it's we need much more of that because power is really at the center of all of the change we're trying to affect, and because we still use it as something that means dominance, control, authority. This is how Euro-patriarchal knowledge defines power. And so, it's no surprise that when a Black woman comes into a powerful role, so long as that is the definition, there's a big chance that she will start to emulate those qualities. And so until we kind of, as you can tell, with a lot of the things that I'm speaking about, it's like we have to go back to the drawing board, and it really ties into what you said about others having defined for us. And so, it seems kind of daunting, but we do have to go back and define for us what things like power means, what leadership means. And yeah, I do think we're seeing that. I would like to end, I guess, on a positive note. People like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, I hope I pronounced that correctly. She's definitely showing up with a different way of being in power. Where I haven't followed Kamala Harris extensively, so we'll see what that definition of power will look like as a vice president if she gets into that role. But yeah, it's, I guess, ultimately the what I'm trying to say is we have to redefine power first and then step into it.
Thank you so much for your insight, Minna. It's been such a pleasure to have you here with us this afternoon. And for those who have joined us live, thank you so much for joining us. Please share this out. If you missed part of it, go back and watch again. And I look forward to getting some more of your comments and things about it, and those who are able to view it on a replay. I just wanted to, let's let people know how they can follow you or get in touch with you, or just what's going on with you now.
Sure.
In the middle of a pandemic.
Yes. Well, I guess it makes it a little bit easier in that sense because we're all online, and I am on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. All of them, the handle is Ms. Afropolitan, so that's MS Afropolitan. And yeah, on my blog, which is www.msafropolitan.com, and I've got all the links there for where you can get the book Sensuous Knowledge as well. And I also just want to say, thank you so much for, great, yes.
Please get the book, and you will learn a lot. You will be inspired. You will, learn to think of some things differently. Offline. I told when I read book, I know there are parts of it that I really said, "Oh, I can relate to this. This is something I've been talking about. I've been dealing with. It's nice to be able to see someone put those things into something I can pick up and refer to, time and time again, just to refresh my mind and give me new ways to think of things. So I definitely appreciate you for writing it. And I appreciate Jessica Paramore. I don't know if she's going to watch this or not, but she was the person who talked to me. Actually, we had her on. A while ago with some of her poetry. We want our bodies back. So, pick up her book as well. Actually, I believe the two of you are on the same imprint. So, if you haven't read,
that is such a good book. Definitely suggest everyone get that. Yeah.
And so, well, one of the things that I always do as we prepare to end for the day is some things around here. Give me 1 second. I want you guys to save the date for our next book discussion, which will be on Monday, October the 5th. And our next book, as you can see there, is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Celia. Actually, it just came out officially a couple of days ago. So I would encourage you to pick it up. And it's a book of short stories that you can get back that big, easy to read. Trying not to overwhelm it, but this is going to be our next book read for the month of October. And as I always do, I would like to be able to give away a copy to someone. So everyone, including Minna, please pick a number between 1 and 64 and drop it in the comments if you're still here. You have to be live to win. But drop the number in the comments, a number between 1 and 64. And I'm going to select someone that will be the winner of the book of the month for next month. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to do that if you're still here. All right, I'm seeing some numbers pop in.
I can't seem to be able to leave a comment. Yeah. This is not fair.
I'm sorry. Well, but, I'll wait until you do, and then you can give me one.
Sure.
I'm going to wait.
Yeah.
So it won't seem like I'm cheating. All right. Now there are a couple people I see number 35, number 27, 28. Put your number back in again with your name because unfortunately I can't see your name. So when I won't know who you are. So it's 35, 27 to 28. I don't see your name. It doesn't have to be the full name. It can just be the first name. And if you win, I'll tell you how to get in touch. So, like we might be good on numbers for right now. What? Okay, Kelly. Oh yeah, I see your name. Yeah, it's just not whoever put 35, 27, and 28. Okay. Oh, hey, Sheila, number 35. All right, so Karen, okay. Store, I see you. All right, I think I've got mostly everybody except number 28. So if you're still there, please drop your Dan. Okay, got you. All right, what is your number, Minna?
I will go with 17.
17, okay. So, back to me. Okay, what do I have here? I pull, must be that or not? Probably not. The number that I pulled is 47. It's supposed to be 47. Looks like it might be Kelly. Kelly Ashley. Yes, Kelly Ashley, you are the closest to 47. So please send me a message. You can either do it on BGC Book Club or just send it to the Congo Collective page. Send me a message with your address and I will be sure to get a copy of the next book out to you. Once again, that is going to be The Secret Lives of Church
Ladies by Deepa Oya. So congratulations to you, Kelly. And also one last thing. During the summer, we were doing like a novel season, and I will admit that I was not always posting about a novel season because I had too much in the middle of the summer, so I wasn't able to really talk about it as much as I would have liked. But basically, a novel season was for people to keep track of the books that they read between Memorial Day, which was back in May, going up to Labor Day, which is this coming Monday. So I'm going to put something out Monday night. I'll put out a link that you can let me know how many books you read for that basically 3-month, 90-day period. And next Thursday evening at 8 o'clock, I will come on after I had a chance to compile that information, and we'll announce the winners for the prize for the summer reading plan. So thank you, everyone. Minna, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. I appreciate you, and coming our first international guest, so you will always hold that honor.
Nice. I'm glad to hold that position. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Hopefully it won't be the last time that we have a chance to connect. So yeah, all of you are still there so people can find you. So we look forward to seeing more from you, hearing more about what you've got going on. Once again, I hope this isn't the last time that you can join us. And to everyone who's here, thank you so much for being a part of the BGC Book Club. I appreciate you. I love you. I look forward to sharing more great books and great authors with you. And you all have it's almost a weekend, so you all have a great weekend. Have a safe holiday. Continue to wash those things. Take good care of yourself. Love you. Have a good night. All right. Bye-bye. Minna, hang on for a second.
I will.